Hello and welcome. Welcome to another in our series of Parexel Lunch and Learns, where we take an area of topic of interest, a hot topic of interest, and we talk to one of our experts about that topic and find out some insights into how companies can address some key challenges that they face. And today's topic of interest is the regulatory support for mergers and acquisitions. Prior to the pandemic, M&A activity in the biopharmaceutical industry was soaring. 2019 saw $414 billion worth of M&A activity. And when the pandemic hit and we saw a shift in those dollars to investing in pipeline, we're still anticipating a return to M&A as we begin to transition, thankfully, out of the pandemic. So the regulatory support for mergers and acquisitions will remain a hot trend and a hot topic. And I'm delighted today that I'm joined by Phil Smith, one of my colleagues here at Parexel, a longtime colleague at Parexel. And before the pandemic hit and grounded us both, Phil and I spent an awful lot of our time traveling around the world, talking to biotech and pharmaceutical companies about how they can effectively manage the regulatory support for merger and acquisitions. And as we will hear from Phil, there are some key challenges and risks that need to be mitigated. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Phil, to this chat today, and thank you for sharing your insights. Let's start by talking about why do companies engage in mergers and acquisitions before we get into some of the regulatory specifics. So why M&A in the first place, and what does that trigger?
Sure, and thanks for the introduction, Paul. So there's a number of reasons why companies choose to buy and sell products, and they can be products that are in development, they can be products that are already approved and on the market, of course. So companies could be looking to rationalize their businesses or focus on particular therapeutic areas. For example, move away from or expand their consumer healthcare products or further develop their oncology offering. For smaller companies, it's a really good way of gaining rapid expansion and entry into new markets. Whatever the reason, these are typically commercial decisions that are made at the corporate level, but that ultimately need to be supported by a well-executed regulatory plan.
That's great, Phil. And so let's get it to the punchline here. What are some of the challenges that you've seen companies face when engaging in M&A, and particularly in the regulatory environment?
Yeah, it's really easy to underestimate just how challenging it can be from a regulatory perspective. So companies need to remember, when products are moved from one company to another through, a seller and a buying company, that regulatory is just one group in a long chain of impacted functions. That, again, there shouldn't be an underestimation of the upfront effort that's needed to coordinate and plan effectively across those different functions, with the ultimate aim of keeping product in market and supplied to patients. Challenges can be dictated by interdependencies, both across different functions, but also from a regulatory perspective. Are there markets, for example, that depend upon an approval in a prior market? If you have an area of the world, particularly in some of the international markets with a less developed regulatory framework, oftentimes they require CPPs to support the regulatory submission. So again, they're dependent on an approval in the first market before submissions can be made. So all that needs to be factored in and weaved into the upfront regulatory planning.
That's really helpful, Phil. And a company head of regulatory watching this video today, what should they view as the top considerations to overcoming some of the challenges that you've mentioned here?
So I'm going to keep mentioning and referencing the plan. So the regulatory plan needs to be integrated into that cross-functional plan. The regulatory plan itself is only going to succeed if you have current and validated regulatory intelligence to support that plan. What does that mean? You need to know what are the submission requirements per market from a document perspective. There's no harmonization, even within Europe, from country to country. when you're talking about national licenses, the submission requirements themselves differ from country to country. So there's no harmonization in the actual submission requirements. You need to know what are the approval timelines. So after the submission, how long does it take before I take control, before I become the marketing authorization holder with all the obligations that go with that? How long are we allowed to have stock in market supplied to patients in the packaging and livery of the prior marketing authorization holder? How long after approval is it before we have to, as the new marketing authorization holder, have our stock into the market? That varies from country to country, from region to region. All of that needs to be factored in. The best way in our experience to control and mitigate any of those risks is having this control by a central team at each quarter level, coordinating the different activities at a local level. But do that up front, do the planning up front, make sure the roles and responsibilities, what your central team versus your local teams are going to be responsible for.
That's great, Phil. I was going to close by asking you what is the top takeaway for people watching this video, but I think it's obvious. It's the plan, and ensure that you have an effective plan. So I'm not going to ask that question, but I will ask, why should a company that is considering M&A has just been announced and they suddenly have to be able to deliver the regulatory support for it, why would they come to a company such as Parexel for support? I guess executing the plan that you've just described. What are the key deliverables that we're providing at Parexel to support companies active in this space?
Yeah. So the regulatory department hasn't made the decision to go out there and buy these new products. They haven't asked for that additional workload to be put on their desks. So that's one thing we can help with. It's supporting already stretched regulatory departments from a capacity perspective. We have a global team of people ready and able to support these activities. For the smaller companies, as I said, one of the goals of an M&A activity for them may be entry into a new market. They probably don't have in-house experience with those markets, and that's where we can provide the expertise. We can support not only the upfront planning, building of the regulatory submissions, but fundamentally the tracking and reporting piece as well. And I think it's easy to overlook just how important that is. But from a registration and compliance perspective, the ability to have a real life current view of what product is approved where, who is the MAH in a particular market, is absolutely fundamental. And that's what I see as one of our key offerings.
Thanks, Phil. Great advice. We'll close the discussion now. Thank you for sharing your insights, Phil. Between us, I think we've got 4 decades of experience in this space, traveling the world and helping companies design their plan and helping them to execute against it. So don't hesitate to reach out to Phil or I. I think there will be a link so you can send email questions as well. We're here to help and we'd love to hear from you. Again, Phil, thank you very much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you, Paul.